What is up, everybody? Welcome to another Tuesday Live podcast. I am your host, Joe Delafave.
I'm his wife, Jenn Delafave, and we are super excited to come to you today to chat all about the best way to get started in real estate investing is with Creative Finance.
And today we're going to go over, there's a lot of different ways to get started in real estate. And I would say the traditional way that we all learn is you got to, get with a realtor and you have to look on the MLS for that deal. You got to save up all of this money and capital to, put that for 20% down, or maybe you could get an FHA and a house hack or different things like that. And there's a lot of different ways to get started in real estate. And they're probably all wonderful to a point. But I'm going to go over my favorite way to get started in real estate. And boy, looking back on the 24 years that I've been doing this, if I knew now what I knew back then, oh my gosh, right? And we always say that, but this is something to think about. So we're going to dive into why seller finance is the best way to get started, either for your own property, but we're here talking about real estate investment properties today too.
Well, I think that's the thing is everyone has their own way of starting. And it's kind of funny looking back. I didn't realize I house hacked, but that's kind of what I did. But I bought my primary residence and I had a girlfriend move in with me and she helped pay my mortgage and she just rented a room and that was that. And that does not have to be the way you get started in investing. It does work, but with rates today, can't say that'd be my first say, like, that's not the first thing I'd say to do.
Right. Maybe you don't want roommates. Like everybody talks about house hacking and how wonderful it is. But like if you've had other people live at your house, could be friends, like that could hopefully end well, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you don't want family moving in your house and paying part of your rent or friends or other things, right? So I hear people talk about house hacking. Well, if you want roommates, maybe that is a good option. And if you're doing seller finance, it doesn't mean that you still can't do that.
Or maybe you own your own house and you're not looking to house hack another one, right? Like you have your primary and now you've got your 9-to-5 job, you're working, you've got kids, a wife or a husband. And now you're like, well, how do I take that leap into the world of real estate investing? This is the episode for you.
So get ready to take some notes because we're going to talk about the properties, the reason why behind it, and then at last, but how you could find these properties yourself. And it's really simple, easy to get started. So I'm going to talk about today's seller financing deals. These are properties that are free and clear. There's no mortgage. They don't owe anything on the property. It is a free and clear property. Now we do buy, you hear buying on wraps or a lease purchase or a lease option and subject to, and all these other ways that you can buy real estate. Well, a lot of those, there's a loan in place with a bank, right? Now you're contending with that, which a fun fact is 45% of the houses in the US don't have a mortgage on them. They're owned free and clear. So what does that mean? Almost half the houses that you see, there's no mortgage on it. So today we're going to talk about those deals. And the reason why I love those deals so much is because when you're doing a seller finance deal, you can control the pen. I can now negotiate the price. I can negotiate buying with no money down. I can negotiate what the monthly payment is. I can negotiate the term length, all of these wonderful things. If they have a mortgage in place, I can't get that payment any lower. And you'd be surprised how many deals that we're currently running into where they do have a mortgage in place. And when I look, once you add in the taxes and the insurance and the interest and the principal, sometimes the payment's too high and it doesn't cash flow. You can't rent it for as much as the payment is. The payment to own it is way, way higher. I can't negotiate that payment any lower. Therefore, those deals are really tough. And sometimes, like we have that one in Florida right now on Palm Bay, south of Melbourne. It's a cute house. It's got a 3.6% interest rate on it. It doesn't cash flow. Once you add in the taxes and it's turnkey, the seller says you could take it for what I owe on it, doesn't cash flow. So today we're going to focus on these free and clear properties, the properties where they don't have a mortgage on them, right? So this was the first creative finance deal that we did, is when we found a seller named Steve. Seller Steve inherited his grandfather's house and he wanted to sell it and he didn't want to put it on the market. He had it rented to some friends. And what we did is at that point in our career, we were doing what's called direct mail. we would send out mail to people who had an absentee house, right? They didn't live in it. They were an absentee owner. And Steve reached out to us and said, I do want to sell my house. I don't want some lowball offer because it's not a fixer-upper or a junker. But then when we mentioned, would he be open to terms, seller financing, he said yes. So that was the very first Creative Finance deal that we did. Now on that deal, we bought it with $100 down. We paid $3,000 in closing costs. We had a $500 payment, right? And then with taxes and insurance, I think the payment was what, $750?
I don't remember.
I think it was $800 a month. So with that being the case, those were our favorite deals. We can negotiate that payment because originally if we went to the bank and took out a loan, that payment would be considerably higher. So we're going to talk about, first of all, where do you find these seller finance deals?
All over.
Is there some place in particular that you like?
I personally like upstate New York. I feel like you can literally just anywhere you want to focus on. You just need to talk to enough people.
So I would think one of our favorite strategies is to get leads through Facebook because you can target anywhere and you can target it really simple just by joining Facebook groups, making a post inside the group, have the seller reach out to you with a property they want to sell, right? So this is a great way, but also too, you should be networking. You should go to the meetups. You should be going to all these different places. The name of the game is to get leads. But once you have your leads, what are you going to do with them, right? Mm-hmm. So every one of these, we always ask, would you be open to seller financing? Now, are these junkers? Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Fixer-uppers?
Right? It depends. You got to ask the question.
Right? Sometimes they're not. And many times that we're finding turnkey properties. Now, especially we live in Florida. And in Florida, we're finding a lot of people have a second home. So if they do have a property and it is up north and they want to sell their vacation property, this is something we offer every single time. So if you have a seller who has a free and clear property, I want a little bell to go off in your head when you're talking to a seller. And that little ringer should go off saying, hey, would you be open to terms if I were to pay that price? Right? And the four things that you have to negotiate are what?
The four legs of the chair. Yep.
The four legs of the chair.
Or the 4 deal points. I don't know why you call it a chair, but.
Well, you need 4 legs of a chair to sit on it.
You do.
So you got your purchase price, your monthly payment, your money down, and your term length. Those are the 4 big things that you're going to have to negotiate when you have a seller who is open to terms. So if you find a free and clear property, that is probably the best way to get your first deal. And the reason why is now if you're paying that seller directly, they're going to be getting monthly cash flow. Many times we're buying those deals with no money down. But the best part about it is you can negotiate a 2% interest rate today. You could still get these rates at 2 and 3%. Sometimes they're even 0%. Those deals are out there. You just have to ask the seller the questions. So if you're like, hey, Joe, that sounds great, but how do I get started? Well, go to our website, creativefinanceplaybook.com. On there, we give away how to get your leads for free, how to get in front of these sellers without costing any money. Now there's 20 something, probably 30 different ways to get leads. They all work. But this Facebook hack that we figured out years ago has made it so much easier to target anywhere around the country. Super simple. And it doesn't cost any money. So if we want to start looking at deals in upstate New York, we just join groups there. Join groups that you want to target, put that post in those groups, and therefore you're going to have sellers reach out to you. Then our script is on there too. So if you want to know the questions that we ask every seller, the script is there. Those are the same questions that our team asks. It's the same questions we ask. And you're going to have sellers make you the offer. And every single time, we always ask the seller, would they be open to terms? It's just that simple. And there's going to be many times where once you do have that seller who does that, those are the ones you want to get on the phone with. So make sure you're spending time talking to motivated sellers who have that extra home that they want to sell. And sometimes it's a vacation home. Sometimes they're relocating. Many times you're thinking to yourself, they're going to want a whole bunch of equity. But there's many of these people who that's not their big issue. They don't need the cash. That's not their big why, their motivation behind it. Their motivation behind the deal, sometimes they just don't want to have to worry about the hassle of selling your house. Now, for the first time 2 years ago, we sold a house that we lived in. And to get it market ready, what was that process like?
Oh, it was so fun. It was not stressful at all.
Well,
yeah, no, it was a lot of work, especially if you've lived there for a long time. And as homeowners, you always have projects going on, and they're just never ending things that need to get brought back to life. And you kind of put them off until you really, when you go to sell, you realize, holy cow, like we've got to put windows in, a new bathroom, a new sink. What else? We painted everything. We ended up, our AC died right before.
Like the week before.
Literally the week before, which was, again, really awesome. But yeah, I mean, all the little things that you don't think about, but obviously to get the house market ready. And I think that's why the ad that we use, the ad quote, meaning like what we're posting in the Facebook groups, it doesn't have to be an ad per se. You don't have to cost any money. It's just taking time, to have a house not market ready it's hitting people in a different spot, because if you've sold a house on market, it does take that special extra. Even yesterday, we had a realtor walk in a house that we're going to be cleaning out, and she's like, oh, wow, right? Like she said, there's a lot of work that needs to get done. And so you just got to make sure that you know what you're doing there.
Well, and I think that's the case because sometimes you might find a beautiful house in a really nice neighborhood. Maybe they've had a pet. Maybe they've had a dog, right? And the dog used the carpet as the bathroom a couple times, and now the house has an odor to it. Doesn't mean it's a junker, but maybe that house, though, does need some type of work before you could put it on the market. Maybe they don't want people walking through their house knowing that the dog used the carpet as the bathroom before. Yeah. So there's all these different reasons why, there's folks who just don't want to list their house on the market. So it could be really high-end properties. We had one in Marco Island, Florida 2 years ago, and that's a $1.8 million house on the water. It wasn't a junker. It was built in 1992, 91, but it needed some work, right? Mm-hmm. And she didn't want to put it on the market and didn't want to list it with an agent. That was the last thing she wanted, was strangers trampling through her house. So I think that was really the key, was finding those sellers who are just highly motivated. So number one, go get that blue ad, go post it in the Facebook groups in abundance. I always say do 3, 4, 5 groups a day, every single day. And these are like moving to the area groups. These are garage sale groups, yard sale groups. I love whatever town it is groups. There's tons of them in the area. And it's not just the city. So if you're looking at like Nashville, there's all the suburban towns around it, right? All the little towns all have their own groups too. So making sure you're joining all of them in the area. And maybe you're like, hey, I don't want to buy one on that part of town, but maybe that's just where that person sees it and they have one on the other side. So definitely join as many groups you can. I counted, I'm over 1,000 groups right now. There's a counter on Facebook. And it's just, I have got a ton of them. So anywhere I want to be able to hit and get leads that day, it's just that simple. So get the leads coming in, ask them the magic questions, and then you control the pen. You control it. So what do you want for a down payment? We want it close to 0. On their purchase price, I can be a little bit more flexible on the price, especially if I'm buying with no money down, especially if I have a really low payment and a really low interest rate, then I can do that. So therefore, those are the keys to us why I think getting your very first deal, whether you're going to live in it as your primary residence or for your first investment property, a seller finance deal can be your very best. You don't have to get bank qualified. You don't need to get your credit checked. Now you're into a deal. You always want to have some working capital just in case there's repairs that you're going to need to do to the house or anything like that. But many of these deals you can buy with just a few $1,000s in closing costs, and you are into your very first deal. So I wish I knew that when I was looking to buy my first house. I probably would have looked in different areas, right? I probably would have been trying to see if I can negotiate, because Americans, I say this a million times, we're payment buyers. We're shopping for a payment, and that's what it is. So if somebody could buy a $2 million house and your payment was $1,000 a month, anybody could afford it. So that's, I think, the big key. So when I hear people talking about like house hacking, a lot of times you're using your own credit. Like when you bought your first house and you were house hacking, was that your intention?
Oh, but then the mortgage payment kept going up. So I was like, this is getting expensive. And I'm a teacher trying to afford grad classes. And, I had a couple extra rooms. So I thought, why not ask a friend who was looking for an apartment anyway?
So why was your payment going up?
I don't really remember. the interest rate or the more, I think it was taxes, insurance. I'm not sure, the escrow.
Yeah, usually there could be like an escrow.
But it went it was like a big jump. I remember, like, I don't know if it was like 500 to 800 or something, but like monthly, like $300 a month on a teacher's salary who's already like not making a ton of money and having to pay for master classes. It was crazy. Master's degree.
Yeah. So obviously your payment goes up. You're like, okay, I need to do something. I'm going to start renting out part of my house. So what happens is when you do have a mortgage, if the taxes change or the your insurance changes, your payment can too, especially if you've got an escrow shortage where you didn't pay enough into it because there was an increase. My payment when I bought my house through the bank jumped up a few $100 when I very first bought it too. So there's many times where you might buy that first house, go to the bank, put a bunch of money down, you have this payment, and then you find out a short time later, your payment jumps up and you can't afford it. And those weren't adjustable rates. Those were fixed rates. But generally when you do buy a house, especially if you bought it for more than the last person does, they're going to reassess it. And that means they're going to say the value went from this to up to here now, and therefore your taxes are going to be adjusted too. So there's many times, especially on new builds, I'm seeing people in Florida who are buying new build houses that are, the taxes are very, very low in the beginning. And then once they buy it and they purchase it at that higher price, the town comes in and reassess and their payment jumps up huge. And sometimes I've seen taxes go from a few $1,000s up to 10, 12,000 like that, which changes your payment about $1,000 a month. So if you had $1,000 a month swing in your payment, like what would that do for most Americans? Well, that's happening now all across Florida for sure. And really when most people are buying that new house, that's what happens. So you got to be mindful of that when you're buying. And that's why, once again, I like seller financing because I'm paying the taxes. I pay the insurance. So I have that built in. If my taxes do change per month or for the year, you can't fight City Hall. If you bought the house, that's what you bought it for. But you can always, talk to them about if your assessment goes up too high. But that's the kind of, I think, the cleanest way to buy deals, guys, is by seller financing. So here was one of the myths that a lot of people say is like, if I have a free and clear house, do I have to divide the payments up by 30 years or by 20 years or what's that like? And you could also do just flat payments too. So one of the first deals we did, it was just $500 a month, and that was covering the payment. So once again, I would say that would be my favorite way to do them.
I know. I think that one was like, looking back, it was so simple, and it's kind of cool that it was that way, it being our first deal. But also, it's just kind of when he told us that he was renting it out to a buddy, and he was like, I don't really want to be a landlord. And you asked him, like, well, what are you renting it for? And he said 500. And then on top of that, he was still having to take care of the maintenance, the repairs, the taxes, insurance, and all of that. So like he had a better deal with us because he was actually collecting 500 while we took care of all of that. Because then we were able to bring it back up to speed and market rent. I mean, not that the house needed much work, but just kind of. Yeah,
but he was giving his buddy a deal because we charged $1,250 for rent on that house.
And I think that's if you stop and think about that for a minute too. We eat, breathe, sleep real estate. We, as investors, even if you are just in learn mode, right? Like maybe you've listened to a lot of podcasts, but like more than the average person who just inherited a home and is renting it out to a buddy. And so people don't look at it as a business. Steve did not look at that house as a business at all. It was more of a liability in a sense of like he had this emotional attachment. He wasn't making any money on it really at the end of the day, if you added everything up on it, and it was weighing on him, and I think that was something like you got to remember that as a business owner, as an investor, you're going to look at things a lot differently. And so we're really helping people who kind of just find themselves with this extra house, which sounds silly. Like who would have an extra house? People get them. Like people pass away. They end up, receiving them in a will, or maybe they end up in a divorce, or maybe they got remarried and now they have like our other landlord who had a house in Brockport and he was renting it out, but he's like, I don't want to be a landlord, but I moved in with my new girl and now I got this house, right? So this is an abundance out there. You just have to be looking for it and ask the right questions to be able to help.
Yeah, so if you're going to target free and clear properties, there's a lot of different ways to do that. There's a lot of different list pulling services if you're going to go that route. You can go on to things like Propstream. I think we used Melissa Data. I don't know how I remember that, but that was the company that pulled data for us too. And there's a few others out there that you can find free and clear properties, whatever county, whatever town or zip codes that you like. And you could get that information skip trace, and you could either send them a letter. If you do call, you got to be careful because some of them might be on the do not call list. That's why mail sometimes is pretty simple. And we, in the beginning, just did these handwritten letters. Eventually, we hired a printer, a company to do it for us that made them look handwritten. But in the beginning, that's exactly what we did. It gets to be expensive. I talked to the printer, and recently, if it's about $1.40 per letter, because the actual stamp now is almost as expensive as the letter and the printing and the list pulling itself, because you got to put a stamp on them all. But that was a really effective way to get our first deal. But then we went on to social media and we started growing outside of our area. And this is where we started finding more seller finance deals outside of Rochester, where we first started. Our next one was in Buffalo, New York, in one of the suburbs called Tonawanda. And this seller had a house that he owned free and clear. He bought it cash. They renovated a bunch of things to the property, and then they wanted to move down south, be closer to family. So when they reached out to us, he did want top dollar for his house. He didn't want to put it on the market, which we found out later on because it had pet smell.
Well, smell.
But he had, I think, like 5 or 6 dogs in there.
A lot. Yeah.
It was a bunch. So once he wanted to sell that property, he was open to doing terms. He needed some cash to help them move, which we did, but we negotiated on that one. Same thing. It was a flat $1,000 a month, no interest for the next 7 years. So once we paid top dollar for that house, but also too, the market did jump up quite a bit. So the value of that's significantly higher than we bought it for. Nobody could foresee that happening, but that's exactly what happened. So we bought it right, and we're paying it down quickly at the same time. And this is a beautiful house in a nice neighborhood, great school district. It's like a 2,000 square foot ranch with a finished basement. So once again, guys, you wouldn't think maybe in a turnkey house like that, a seller would be open to doing that, but they are. Their motivation was he didn't want to have people walking through the house, smelling the dog odor, having all the dogs get taken out while they left, right? Because when you're showing the house, you got to put the dog somewhere. They didn't want to deal with all that. They were packing up the truck, the U-Haul, and they were moving, and he just wanted to know he got his money, and he had money coming in every single month. So that $1,000 that we send them, that makes their car payments. That makes their housing payment of the new place where they live down in, I think he's in North Carolina.
Can't keep up with them.
Yeah. So we have some questions we wanted to go over too. If you got any other questions, we'll do that. So how do you recommend pulling a list from Propstream for these sub 2 deals? I don't necessarily want to talk to people that don't have any reason to sell out of a low rate. Well, John, I would say you could pull a list, but you're going to definitely have to move a lot of dirt to get to the gold, which means that you're going to have to talk to people. And many people aren't going to want to sell. And that's just the thing, right? I wish that every single person I talked to said yes. It would make my life a lot easier.
We'll go back to the letters. How many letters did we send out that batch?
We sent out 2,000 letters.
2,000 letters to get one yes. But that's kind of just to kind of put things in perspective there.
That was a lot.
Yeah.
And out of the 2,000 letters that you got, I think out of that, if I'm not mistaken, we probably had like 30-ish people, maybe 40 actually like come back in. And
say probably 100 came back.
A bunch of client came back, but I'm talking about
return to sender.
Some of the letters came back and the skip tracing information wasn't correct, or they moved or something happened. We did have some people call and they're all angry.
Oh, so angry.
Like, how did you get my information? And they were screaming about
Even
that.
people you went to high school with.
One I went to high school with and thought she was trying to pull, us buy her house around her. So that happened. True story. But we did get probably, I'd say, good 20, 30 leads of somebody who wanted to sell. Many would not do terms, right? So we asked everybody if that would be something they would do. And he was one of the people that said yes, that not only did he say yes, because others did too, but we agreed on it and then moved forward with closing and actually closed. Because some people might say, I'll do seller financing, but I want 200 grand down. Well, maybe that's not the deal, right? So the
Do you
list
remember the list that you pulled?
for that, yeah, it was absentee owners.
Just absentee?
Yep.
Okay.
I pulled just absentee. So
And is that something you can do on Propstream nowadays?
you can. And the neat thing about Propstream, when you're pulling your list on Propstream, you can pull absentee owners. So it was like single family homes is what I pulled. Residential single family homes where there was the absentee owner, and the one I chose was living out of state. Propstream has living out of county, living out of state, or I think in the area. The only one that I typically go after is the one where they live out of state. You know, if I'm in New York looking for deals, I want to find somebody who lives in Texas, right? Who has this property in New York. They don't live there and they're wanting to sell it. That's my favorite one to find, right? Because many of those deals that we found, they've already moved. They've got this property. They don't want to go back. They don't want a deal. So absentee owners is always one of my favorites. On Propstream for subject to deals, however, slight difference.
That's a great way to get a little free trial too.
Yeah, there's a link for the free trial of Propstream if you want to do it yourself. But one of my favorite lists to pull for potential subject to deals or wraps where we buy them, where they have a mortgage, right? I will look up a county. I will look for single family homes. I will look for properties that are even currently for sale on the market. And what I do is I look for deals that have a loan to value minimum of 80%. So I'll go over that again, but their loan to value is a minimum of 80%. So that means if it's $100,000 home, they owe at least 80 grand, if not more. So what does that mean? I'm looking for somebody who doesn't have much equity, because if the seller says yes, if they don't have much equity, they're more likely to not be able to drop their price. Sometimes in these situations, they might have already moved. Those do not have to be absentee, right? Single family homes currently on the market with a very low loan to value ratio. So they don't have much equity. Minimum of 85% is usually 80%, 85%. And what that will do is give you a whole list of houses that are currently on the market with a very low equity. Number two thing, if you find there's that search in the county that you looked in, and there's a lot of those, what I will do next to kind of weed out the good from the ugly is I will put that they have to have a maximum interest rate of 4%. Which means I'm looking for the deals who have very little equity with a rate under 4% that are currently listed for sale. That's my agents. Now I'm going to just text every agent on there, and I'm going to text them. I'm going to ask them if the seller would be open to terms with a well-qualified buyer. It's just that simple. And there's going to be many agents who will say, nope. There's going to be some agents say, what do you mean? And there's going to be some agents who understand and say, yeah. And then you obviously want to talk to them. You always want to find out what's the seller's motivation. What's their why? You know, did they move? Is the house vacant? Did they get relocated because of their job, or there's a divorce and they're splitting up? Like, there's so many different reasons why this could help, but you really want to know the why behind it. So that's probably my very favorite list to pull. And I see that you're in Cape Coral. Yay. I love it down there. You're going to find a lot of those deals there. So yes, I would love to do some deals there. I'm wanting to buy there. I have a seller finance deal right now in Cape Coral. The gentleman has a house. He wants $960 for it. It's on the water. It's a 3,100 square foot house with a pool and a boat lift. Got the whole setup. He is okay with doing no money down. Here's the catch, though. His payment is like $4,800 a month because taxes and insurance alone, I think the taxes are 15, 16 grand, and the insurance is slightly less than that per year. Mm-hmm. So his PITI payment with everything included is like $4,800. 3,100 square foot house on the canal. And this is one of the last canals that take you right out into the river. So beautiful property, but those deals are out there in abundance, John. So keep looking. And if you know anybody looking for that deal, shoot me a message, because I think we're writing that one up. But great stuff, gang. And that's really what it comes down to, is even if you're going to pull a list, you could do it on Propstream. You could do it in a lot of different ways. My favorite lists have always been absentee owners, people who have a house, but they don't live in it. That means absentee, they live somewhere else. And how do they know that? Is because the tax bill is getting mailed to a different address, right? So if I have a house if I live in Florida and I have a house in New York, well, chances are I'm going to have that tax bill mailed to my house here. Well, then that's going to show in public record, and that's where they find out you're an absentee owner. So if that bill gets mailed out of state and they know that you live out of state, that's how that will show up. So those are my favorite lists to always pull. Now, if you're in Florida, you're going to find a lot of those. If you're in many of these states, you will too. You'd be surprised how many absentee owners are in every county. So if you want to have some fun, you could also do absentee owners, free and clear properties that are currently listed for sale. And now what you're doing is you're reaching out to those agents and you're just asking them, with a well-qualified buyer, would your seller be open to seller financing? Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of a tip. The longer that property has been on the market, the more likely they might be open to doing that. If the house just hit 2 or 3 days ago, they're going to want to see what the market does first. If the house has been on the market for months and months, many price drops, it's still not selling, they might be open to that. So I would definitely be doing that. I've got one of our clients who just called an expired listing. So talking about another way to get a lead, you can get these for free from any realtor. Just ask your realtor to do a search in the county that you want to buy in, and they will send you an automatic email of every house that gets to be an expired listing. Now that doesn't mean that maybe that seller renewed their agreement with another agent, but there's many of those that just don't. I'm going to warn you, you're not going to be the only one that calls them. They're going to get other calls, right? So, but that's just a great way to get leads and to get deals. So I would say the one list that probably doesn't get called hardly ever is the low equity. It seems like when we've called that, they just don't get many phone calls.
Most people don't know the value of it.
Right. They're looking for the ones that have a lot of equity. So the free and clear houses, they're going to get some calls from, other investors, or they get direct mail. If they've got a lot of equity, the same thing. But those little tiny equity deals, and those are some of our favorites, because usually they're just recently bought. They're pretty close to turnkey. They still owe close to what they're worth, right? And they just want to sell it. They want to walk away. And we find a bunch of those. You just got to make sure the rate is low enough. You can cash flow.
You're cash flowing.
So those are the keys, guys. So
what is your exit strategy on the Cape deal? Is there arbitrary spread?
It's hard to say. I haven't found many rentals that are renting for $5,000 or above in that area. Most of the houses that I've seen are smaller, and some of them that I found for rent are not on the water like this one is, and those rent for $2,500 to $3,500. This one's a lot bigger, and it's on the water, and it's got the pool and the boat dock and all that stuff. There's not a lot of those that are renting in this situation like this close, so it's really hard to say. But if I had to guess, I don't know if there would be much cash flow for a long-term rental. You might break even, you might not. It's hard to say. I don't know. We're just chatting with the seller now, and I don't know Cape Coral enough. But if this was something that was going to be a short-term rental or even midterm, although that's a big house for midterm, but people are relocating all the time. However, the one thing I just asked the seller was with the hurricane that just went through, did you have any issues? And he said, no, even with Hurricane Ian, he is 22 feet above level.
Wow.
So he's like, even when Ian came, he had a little bit of issue with like his cage out back over the pool, the lanai, but he's like, the rest of the house, there's no water, nothing.
That's amazing.
So yeah.
I was gonna say shout out to Jeff Cody near Cape Coral 2. Talking to a buyer on a Great Canal, but he is not open to terms yet. And I love that you said that, because that's the whole point of this too, is not everybody's gonna say yes, take my house on terms the first time through. Once in a while it happens and we're both like, let's go. But honestly, a lot of follow-up, explanation, hopping on phone calls, just kind of going through and waiting until the time is absolutely right for the seller. We never beg for houses. We've got plenty on our plates. We're super busy, but if it works out, then absolutely. Yeah,
the power is in the follow-up. It's many times we're not getting the yes in the first call or the first conversation. Sometimes it's many conversations, sometimes it's many weeks or even many months of conversations before we actually have the deal. So I'm going to give everybody a tip. If you've talked to a seller and they've said no, you got to make sure that you're following up with them. Especially, I'm going to say this extra loud, if they have a situation going on. if they're highly motivated and they have some great reason that they need to sell, it doesn't matter if they said no, yes, or maybe today. Always make sure you're going to follow up with those people. The ones that aren't motivated to sell or they have no interest in selling, I just quickly move on with them. Be honest with you, I probably don't follow up with them as much as we should, because if you've got no interest in selling, I have no interest in talking about it, right? So there's also that. But the people who are like, hey, I'm getting divorced, he's already gone, I can't afford this place, it needs too much work, I just want to sell it. All of these really sticky situations, they're out there in abundance, guys. And there are more of these deals out there than there are people like us who are looking for them.
I think, like, looking back, that's definitely something that we messed up on, is because we didn't know any better at the time, or, you're learning so much. And it was really the follow-up and staying organized on all of those leads that were coming through or maybe said no. But, at the end of the day, like, we always talk about the messy, massive action. So you can't beat yourself up too bad, even though there's a couple of deals we look back and we're like, ah.
Well, you know what? I think of one of the biggest deals we've ever done and how we completely botched that deal. Yeah. So the deal on Marco Island.
Oh.
So this lady reaches out to us, says that she wants to sell her house. She writes a comment on our Facebook post. She writes 900,000 and it's yours. Well, at first glance, that's a lot of money for a house, but let's find out more. So we go and send her a message. We copy and paste the script one question at a time. It's the same script on creativefinanceplaybook.com. Go get it. We message her the 10 questions. She says, I won't do seller financing because she needs the money, all of her equity, to buy the next house, but she would do it for $875. I run a Zillow's estimate on the property, and at the time, I think it was worth 1.5 on Zillow. And now I'm looking at comps, and I'm saying, my gosh, this thing is worth 1.8, could be even closer to 2 million, because there was some sales going on there. They were really impressive. Lots on the water were selling for like 1.1. So the fact that she was like, hey, I'll do 875, and this house wasn't like a junker, we're like, this is a deal. So our acquisitionist at the time, no longer with us, so says, okay, good, let's get on a call tomorrow. We've completely dropped the ball. We don't call her. We don't send her a message, nothing. We completely just ghosted her. So our follow-up back in 2022 was whack. It just wasn't good where it needed to be. So this lady luckily followed up with us 3 days later, and she's like, hey, it's me. I thought you were going to call. And we're like, so sorry. Right. And we got on the phone and made that call.
Yeah,
made that deal. So this is the point where, guys, you highly motivated seller had a situation going on, didn't want to sell it on the market, giving us the house for 50 cents on the dollar. Like, time kills deals. And I can't say that enough. Time kills deals. And if you want to rewind this part, the 10 seconds, watch that a few more times. But it is true. We were this close to missing out on, which was a very large check that we got, right? So this is the case, is when you find these motivated sellers, you got to follow up with them, because once they're ready to go, you want to be that person that you've had some type of relationship with them. You've called them. They seem to like you. There's some type of trust factor built to where now they feel comfortable taking it to that next step with you because you've been around for a little bit. So always make sure you're going to follow up with your sellers. So if you've got a hot lead, but they said no, don't be too disappointed. Just stick with it.
Yeah. I got some good questions coming in on Instagram, so they don't pop up here on the main screen. But back to the low equity, what is the benefit for a seller to sell with low equity?
Well, that's a great question. So what is the benefit of a seller to sell if they've got low equity? Well, I'll go over the house that we have right now in Melbourne. The seller wants to sell it. It's a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house. It's 2,500 square feet. It's been completely remodeled. It is absolutely beautiful. It needs nothing. He wants to he's right now at his 3.5 or 3.6 interest rate. He wants to sell it. It's been on the market. It's not selling. By the time he pays the realtor and closing costs and commission, he won't even break even. He's going to have to write a check for it, a check that he doesn't have. He doesn't have enough equity to cover his real estate commission and closing costs, even if he got a full offer for full price, and he's not, and it's just sitting there. Well, now they're relocated. This payment is crushing him. He's trying to survive on making 2 payments, and he can't lower his price any lower. He's dipped into his savings. He's got no more money left. The realtor said, I will let you sell it without the realtor being involved, so they could, not have to worry about the commissions, because it's been in the market for a while. So he says, Joe, if you give me like $5,000, I'll let you have the house. You could just have it. Take over my payment, take over the house. You could buy it for what I owe if you give me $5,000 just so I could pay off some back payments and like on credit cards and stuff. If he had some pocket change and we could cover the closing costs, you could have this house. So the issue with him is he can't lower the price any lower. If the market makes an adjustment, sometimes they're at their limit and they don't have $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 or more to say goodbye to a house they no longer want. And that's a tough pill to swallow, right? To say, to buy a house that you need to buy it with $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 down, that's a lot of money. But imagine if you had to come up with that much money to get rid of a house that you no longer want. That makes it even harder. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these people who are in that situation, we could save them from having to write that check. I could even, on the flip side, maybe even put a few bucks in their pocket and cover the closing costs and close on it right away to stop the bleeding. So no equity are some of my favorite deals. Now, if a seller wants $800,000 for their home and they owe $500,000, well, they could just keep dropping that price until they finally get it sold. They might not get the number. They might not get as much cash out of the deals they were hoping for, but they could still drop their price more and more and more. And sometimes they're banking on that money. Well, in South Florida right now, their equity is kind of evaporating.
Ooh,
week by week.
A good way of describing it.
Well, it's also hot, so everything evaporating down here. But that's what's going on.
True, yeah. And I think it's like, again, there's so many reasons why people are selling. And sometimes people are really in situations like Joe just explained, where there's little equity to no equity, and like they have already moved out, and that's a situation. But that doesn't have to be that every time, but those are situations to definitely like put on your radar and really see if you can do something for them. And then there's other times where people they want the convenience of being able to move. Like we just bought the house up in East Chatham, New York. Like they just wanted to leave and know that the house was sold without having to go through realtors and all of the things. So, don't think everybody is in distress, but that is definitely something to be looking for.
Yeah. Same thing. Like the one we have in Northport. It's the same thing. The people just bought it. They paid $290 for the house. They got a VA loan. So VA loans means they don't have to put any money down. They could even qualify to roll in their closing costs. So they bought the house for $290. They owe $299 on it. They rolled in $9,000 in closing costs, commissions, and all that. So at this point, where they're not commissions, but closing costs, so they owe $299. They have it listed on the market right now at $315. They started off at $329. They need to sell it. They're getting relocated for his job. And at $315 right now, it's been on that number for, I think, like 4 months. And he's like, I can't lower it anymore. And so this is another situation. Now, this house is turnkey.
I don't think I've heard this one yet.
Crystal clean, turnkey, needs absolutely nothing. It just doesn't cash flow. He's got a 6.6 interest rate. I think I've showed you the one. The payment's just too high. It doesn't make sense.
Right there, I can tell.
But Northport, nice area in Florida, just south of Sarasota. This one's probably 20 minutes from all the stuff. So it's a great house, doesn't need a thing, turnkey. And, the seller's in a tough spot because they just bought it. They have a high interest rate too. So that's part of the reason why.
Yeah.
Even when seller says, yes, you could have my house, no money out of pocket, just take it over with closing costs. If it doesn't cash flow, those are tough houses to buy.
You need to know your numbers for sure. And that's really important.
Yeah, because I get a lot of people asking me, like, is the market going to go crash? Is it going to go up? Well, let's just go over two hypothetical situations. Let's go over first, say it does. And I don't think it's going to crash, but nobody knows. But let's just say it does. Or let's just say there's a dip, which is probably more likely. It doesn't matter to me.
Well, what went up in 2022 had to come down.
Yeah, it was just so straight up. Like the stock market,
insanity.
Everything was going straight up. There's going to be some type of correction, right? In some areas, it might be more affected than others. And the areas that will probably be more affected are the ones that were like really skyrocketing.
Yeah.
Like here. But if that is the case and that does happen, I'm able to buy those deals as long as they cash flow. So if the market does go down, as long as I'm cash flowing every property we have every month, then that's fine. So I don't really concern myself with that. If the market goes up, even better. I'm cash flowing properties that are going up in value. So the key to this is, for me, I've seen too many people say, well, Joe, I'm going to wait for appreciation, and that's what I'm banking on. Well, sometimes if you get caught buying at the wrong time, it could be a very long time before you're getting to the number you're hoping to get to. And with us, the way I figure is, no matter what happens, if you're still bringing in that cash flow every month, the market will go up, it will go down, but overall it will go up. And that's what we're looking for, the long haul. So cool. You got any more questions?
Yeah, I got one more over here. I'm interested to hear what your response would be, because I know what I would say. She's saying, what's the best option, to buy an old house and remodel it, or buy land and build a house on it?
I guess that varies on what you're going to do with it. Are you living in it, or are you
thinking, yeah, they're going to live in it, but.
I mean, if you do buy the land and you do build brand new, you pretty much know that there shouldn't be many issues for a very long time. When you get an old house and you rehab it, sometimes I just think of the movie Money Pit, which is a movie from like the 1980s, where
totally dating ourselves.
Super old movie.
Great movie though. Go find it. Tom Hanks.
But I do remember parts of the movie. I was young too. I was super young when that movie came out. But I do remember the tub like crashing through the floor of this old house they're trying to remodel. So the house that scares me the most are really big, really old houses for full remodels. Like, terrify me, because usually it costs more than what the house is worth. So if anything, I'd buy land and build new if I'm going to live in it.
I thought you were going to say that you would just find some payments to take over and help a seller out.
Oh, I would do that too. But if I only had those two choices, if I'm going to live in it, I would probably do that.
Yeah, I would build new. And I know some people say, oh, it's like the hardest thing ever. But I think after we've renovated a couple houses, we could totally build our own house. Yeah,
and I've seen folks renovate houses built in the 1800s, which by American standards, that's old. If you're in Europe, it's not that old of a house, but you get into a lot of stuff.
Yeah. All right, John's got another great question. How do you figure what you're going to put into the seller's pocket on a sub 2? So meaning that there's a mortgage in place and that you're going to take over making his payments. Is there a maximum % down you would like to stick to?
Yeah, the maximum % down that I like to stick to are company policies that we typically buy with no money down.
0.
So that's what we like to stick to. That's what I'm always focusing on. The kiss of death on any deal is having too high of a cost of entry, and usually backing that up by not having enough cash flow to offset that, right? So what I'm looking for is, I want to buy a property with no money down. I'm not picking on anybody, but I see people like, hey, I'm getting an 8% return on my real estate portfolio. Good. Not knocking your hustle. I love it. Go get it. However, if I'm buying a property with no money down and I'm cash flowing on it, and I put in somebody who gives me more money to move in than I use to buy it, then my cash flow is infinite on those deals. So that's why I really truly focus on getting into the no money down deals. Now, I have done deals where I had to come up with 30 grand to put down. I've got one right now. They'll say, hey, let's go do the deal. I just need $35,000 down. Now, this is a turnkey house that's 4 years old in Florida, 3,000 square foot house, gorgeous neighborhood, needs nothing. So there are some times where they want that much money down. However, if you stick with it, you'll have their number come down. So many times I've had people ask for close to 6 figures down and walk away with 10 grand down, because I might not agree to right away, and I'll let time help me and be on my side. So ideally, try to buy with no money down. I see these deals posted in Facebook groups all over, and the person who's trying to wholesale the deal, they'll be like, cost of entry is $65,000, doesn't cash flow long term, but if you do short term rental, you can make 57 cents a month. And I'm like, that's a horrible deal. Right? So high cost of entry, no cash flow, kiss of death.
Yeah, and don't assume that the seller needs all their equity.
They don't. Many of them don't. Some do. Many don't.
Some want it, but again, at the end of the day, like, you just have to ask the right questions. I just posted that on my Instagram post today, all about seller financing, which we're talking about, and that we do typically buy with no money down. okay? And if the seller says, no, I need money, then those next key phrases is just, well, what's the least you'd need, right? And then have conversations. What do they need the money for? We've had people that just needed a couple $1,000s to move their family with the U-Haul. And, at the end of the day, they can wait a couple more years because it's years, not months, to get them cashed out.
Yeah.
Good stuff. All right. We got YouTube comment. The cost to sell most houses is roughly 8 to 9%. Is that right?
I thought, and you might be right, I heard 11% was the industry average between commissions, closing costs, and then doing some light renovations to the house. So sometimes you're going to just do some paint before you sell it. Sometimes you're going to, take the pictures off the wall and do small little things like that. But usually it's about that. You're going to pay 6% commission. You're going to have closing costs, and closing costs vary on many different things depending on what state you live in. And then second, the price of the house. $100,000 house, $1 million house, those will be different in closing costs too. So generally overall, I factor in about that 10, 11% is what it would cost typically. Great question.
Yeah, another Instagram question. Let's clarify, what does no money down mean? You may have paid money down, but the tenant buyer paid more to get into the home is technically no money down. So I guess when we throw out there, we typically buy with no money down. What we mean is that the seller is, if they need a down payment. So upon closing, we will always cover the closing costs, but we like to buy with no money down to the seller at that point in time. So we might put $100 down to, solidify that contract at the attorney's office. But other than that, the seller isn't getting their money until later on.
Yeah. So when we buy a deal, so many times people are like, oh my gosh, really, like no money? I'm like, well, not exactly. When you put a down payment on a property, that comes off what you owe, right? Many times when you buy, you got to buy with 3.5% down, or 5% down, or 20% down. Well, we do it with $100 down, which is like probably 0.00 whatever down, right? So we're not even putting anywhere close to that down. $100. Mm-hmm. But cost of doing business is that we cover our half of the closing costs, but we're also covering the seller's half of the closing costs too, because you're not going to want your seller to sell you this house with no money down and then have to come to closing owing a couple $1,000s in closing costs. They won't want to do it. They won't do it. Yeah. So part of doing a deal is we have to come up with both closing costs, both sides. So $100 down, I might have to do that plus 3 or 4 or 5,000 in closing costs. Usually an insurance policy, you're going to need to do that, right? Mm-hmm. And then you're going to switch utilities into your name. You're going to start making payments in 30 to 60 days, and you're into a deal. So no money down to the seller or $100 down to the seller could still be $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 out of pocket.
Yeah.
So to answer the question is because we offer our renters rent to own. If I have that $7,000, $8,000 out of pocket, my renters will typically give me $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 as a non-refundable deposit to go towards them eventually trying to buy the house. So non-refundable option deposit, because we do a lease option with the option to buy.
Yeah, that's a great question.
So that's our favorite way to actually get paid to buy houses. Because if I only had to come up with 7, 8 and I collected 20, I am up money. And then I get cash flow every single month. And so now that money just keeps coming in. I've got no credit tied into the game. I didn't have my W-2s. I didn't have to do all of the things. I bought this with very little money down. I'm able to get that money back in many times in extra and then just cash flow.
Yeah. And I'm going to work on a visual on that on Instagram, because I think it is important to kind of do that little breakdown of, no money down. That's why it's so important to get no money down to your seller, because you will have to pay for a couple of things there.
Yeah. Because say your seller wants 10 grand down. Okay, well, $10,000 down plus closing costs plus insurance policy, right? Plus now you've got utilities. $10,000 down can mean you need 20 grand to close very easily, right? So you just got to be mindful of that. And so your cost of entry, not everybody, but many times we could buy a house if you only had to come up with $5,000. Maybe if you don't have it, maybe somebody could lend it to you. Maybe mom, grandma, somebody, right? So that's a lot easier to do than $30,000, $40,000 down, because when I bought my first house, they wanted 3.5% down minimum.
This is your primary?
Yeah, the house that I lived in. And I put even more than that down. I think I ended up putting like almost 20% down when I bought it. Plus I covered the closing costs. And, then I walked out of there buying it. And luckily for me, eventually it appreciated. But in upstate New York, for the longest time, those houses, that market stayed really flat.
Yeah.
So I was buying it, making my payment every single month. Luckily, in the last few years, met Jen. She moved
built
in.
a house, a couple kids, dogs.
And then later on, everything went well. But I had to come up with quite a bit of money to buy that house. And if I knew now, after that, many houses I bought with just a few grand out of pocket and I own another property, my gosh, that was definitely the way. And I've got a deal now. It's $1 million property on the water in a 3,000 square foot house with a pool and the boat lift on the canal in Cape Coral. And he's okay with doing it with no money down. He wants $960 for his house and he owes $500,000. He's got $460,000 of equity and he's giving us a 5-year term to get him cash out of that, which means we have to either refinance it or sell it or get our renters to buy it within 5 years.
And see, like that part, those numbers like freak me out in the Florida market right now.
I know. That's
5-year term seems way too short.
That's why I didn't jump on it and drive down to Cape Coral and give him a hug.
Yeah. Because and then here Jeff's got the, if you got a sandwich lease potential in Cape Coral, how much of a premium can you ask on a purchase price and rent? Because the tenant buyer wants the rent to own opportunity. And so in this situation, walk me through that. Cause already if this guy wants it at you said? $960 on a house that he owes something on.
500. Yeah. He bought it 2 years ago. He's got a 299 rate, by the way.
Oh, okay.
But he bought it 2 years ago and he bought it for 8 something and then furnished it.
He bought it at 8 something?
He did.
Ooh.
And he put some cash down, but now his wife and he are getting divorced. She's already moved out. He's like, I got this big whole house by myself. I don't want to deal with all of this.
Has anything sold recently in the area?
I got to look again.
Yeah, I guess that's where I would start looking because
well, he had it listed, I think, at $950 and it wasn't selling.
It's not selling, right?
He's like, well, hopefully in 5 years it goes up. I'm like, yeah, but hopefully.
Hope is not a strategy, my friend.
Right. So that's the case. If he says, Joe, I give you a 10-year term, 15-year term.
Yeah.
We're
talking.
I would be all over it.
So if let's say hypothetically, he wants $960, you said?
Yep.
And he gives you 15-year term, what would you try to rent to own that for?
Well, now here's the next dilemma. Because it being on the water, legitly insurance is $14 grand a year.
Isn't that the one we comped with 9 or whatever? Oh.
Different one.
Okay.
Not that one. I know what one you're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah. So your insurance.
So many deals.
That's the one in Lakewood Ranch that we were looking at.
Okay.
This one, however, is insurance is $14,000 and some change a year because that's flood and homeowners insurance, and then he's also has his taxes, which the last time I saw was almost $16,000. So $2,500 a month.
Florida was better with taxes.
It ain't.
No.
It is not. So kind of is. But still not. You add in the insurance, it's just as bad.
Maybe this is a bad example to try to answer Jeff's question, but
yeah. So how much?
I'm just.
Well, you're going to hear us talk it out loud and walk through it.
Why we haven't written this contract up yet? Clearly.
Right. So here's my dilemma: is $2,500 a month of his payment is just taxes and insurance. Yeah. The other $2,500 or $2,400 is principal and interest.
What does the area even rent for?
So there's hard to say because there's not many houses like his for rent that are on the water, got the pool and the boat dock that is that big. I found others that are 2,000 square feet and they're getting 3,500. This is 3,100 square feet. I'm like, well, his payment's 4,800 all in. Can that support that? I don't know.
Well, I hope too, us having this live conversation with everybody is showing you this is something to not take lightly. You really have to do your research and know your numbers because especially in Florida, if this were a New York house, I feel all day long we can figure that out. But Florida's shifting.
Well, Florida's shifting and this is a hurricane hotspot. It's on the water. He says it doesn't get water in the house, which is great and it's helpful, but $30,000 a year between tax and insurance is a big freaking big nut.
Maybe we talk about the Jacksonville one because so we did get one in Jacksonville that was $100 down.
Yep.
And we just paid the closing costs, put on insurance. So
closing costs on that were how much?
$7,000.
Okay.
Right.
Something like that. 6,000 something.
I don't remember.
I thought maybe you were going to have a closer answer, but say 6,000-7,000 for closing costs. Insurance policy was a couple grand. But we got into that deal with under $10,000 out of pocket. Turnkey condo. I think we need to move some stuff. I think he left a few things in the garage, but that's other than that. He wanted to buy a house with a yard, right? So the payment all in is lower than what we could rent it for. We can cash flow in it, and we're into it with only, and his term was what, 10 years?
I don't remember that either.
Yeah.
Double check.
So
we literally just closed on it.
So I love the longer terms. Those are the best ones that I like. I don't want to get somebody who is looking to get cashed out in a 1-2 year term. So to answer your question, Jeff, yeah, we can get some type of premium for it. You got to be mindful. If your your renter is going to buy in a year or two, which is ideally the objective, the house has to appraise, right? So if the values do stay the same, hurrah. You just can't go too high because once again, the house still has to appraise. Sometimes you're going to get a large non-refundable option deposit. Many times our renters pay above the rent because anything extra they pay out top of the rent goes towards that non-refundable option deposit. So there's definitely ways to make the deal sweeter by doing rent to own. Where I see a lot of times people make the mistake, they have a house, it's worth $500,000, but I'm going to rent to own it to you for $699. And then in 12 months, Jen and I go to buy the house at the $699 price, and we gave you 40 grand down. And the bank's like, well, this is a $500,000 house. You can't get a loan for, that high. That's a problem, right? So they're still going to have to pray. So just be mindful of that.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of them that have gone through the process. So you just want to make sure you can always go down, but you can't go back up, if you catch me there. So price it accordingly.
Yeah.
Always go a little high.
Okay. So back to the build or remodel, if you're going to do that. She says, thank you so much. We do short to midterm rentals, but we do buy older buildings. Now we want to switch strategies. So the properties would be for us and for rentals. So
there you go.
Yeah. And then we answer the no money down. On average, what is your out of pocket for most smooth sailing deals?
Geez. Well, first of all, smooth sailing, right?
What's that?
Everyone's always got an obstacle or something like that. But yeah, so ideally, what is our
out of pocket on average?
$100 down, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 in closing costs.
See, the days of 3,000 are gone. We
keep
buying nicer houses. So
okay, so 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 in closing costs, sometimes even more. That's why I like to buy with $100 down, an insurance policy, and we're into a deal. So
I feel like on an average, if I were to say, it would be about 10 grand out of pocket to then get 15 to 20 grand back on a non-refundable option and the rent.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we're at for that. And then with the rent to own, what if the tenant doesn't qualify? What is their option?
We just renew it. I'll just give more time. I don't kick you out. As long as you're paying rent on time and treating the property nice, I will let you stay in there for as long as you need. They're responsible for maintenance repairs, so I don't have to hear about that, which is easy. So nope, that's my favorite.
Stranger things have happened. I got an email in February where the gentleman said the key is on the gate and he's gone.
Yeah. So just neat ways, guys. And so,
oh my gosh, didn't realize the time.
Yeah.
We were chit-chatting away here today. So absolutely, guys, we have so much fun. Clearly, we're losing track of time here. So if you've got more questions, you know where to find us. Creative Finance Playbook, Jenn and Joe. We are on Facebook. We've got YouTube. Check us out on Apple and Spotify. If you like what you're hearing, go leave us a review and some stars. We'd absolutely love to hear it. And if you've got more questions and you want to chit-chat with us, text Joe 585-207-2240. Until next time, we will be back next Tuesday with more. Take care, guys.
See you guys next week. Bye, guys.